the Director of Operations at the San Francisco Jazz Organization, SFJAZZ. In 2012, he introduced the concept of non-higher education performing arts venue participation and research and education networks at the International Association of Venue Managers Performing Arts Managers Conference in New York City, and has worked ever since to integrate advanced network technology into the arts. Prior to joining SFJAZZ, Mont was on the opening team for Jazz at Lincoln Center, the first venue in the world specifically designed for jazz. San Francisco Jazz was wise enough to lure him to the Bay Area, where he led in the construction of the first freestanding facility in the United States dedicated to jazz. Mont has a bachelor's degree in organizational management and a master's degree in education leadership with a focus on higher education, public assembly, venue management from Lehigh University. I'm looking forward to this. His colleagues here have been here. They've been working on just setting this up for, it seems like, the last 48 hours without sleep. So we sent some food over to Mont last night. So I think he's ready for you. With that, please join me in welcoming Mont Allen.
Okay, good morning. Just give us a minute. We're doing a little setup here so we can have this presentation for you. Okay. Institutions across the world. And when we finally got the network initiated, I went back to Louis and I said, well, Louis, what do we do with this? And he said to me, well, Mount, that's for you to figure out. And so here's one thing we figured out. With further ado, I'd like to introduce to you Satya. And where's Kay? Is Kay in the room? Kay, I'd like to recognize the UC Irvine's Jazz Studies Department and your leadership role in that. And thank you so much for extending your student to us for this exercise. So thank you. Okay.
All right, I think we're ready to go.
Okay. So you can see okay?
Yes.
All right, so we're going to attempt to give you a little bit of instruction on how to approach an Afro-Cuban Latin jazz kind of chart. The main goal for the piano is to create a rhythmical accompaniment that is syncopated, that also follows the chord structure, just as you would be doing in a jazz chart. So I think we're going to start right at letter A, and I'm going to go ahead and play that 4-bar sequence a couple of times through, and then if you'd like to try it.
Sure.
All right? Did you hear? You're okay?
Yes.
Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and play at letter A. I'm going to count about here. 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4. So you'll notice what I did was add a couple of variations and more arpeggio. If you'd like to try it at a slower tempo, that's fine. And just, I can count you in, or you can count yourself in.
Can you show me what you're doing with your left hand as well? So you were playing
something. They're actually parallel. The only difference is that my right hand is playing an octave. So if you'd like to start with just, if you'd like to start with what's written there, without the octave first, with the right hand. Yeah, keep that going. And then when you can, bring in the left hand and double it. Okay, beautiful. Now, let's try something. Let's try, and I'm not sure if this is going to work, but I'm going to try to play the bass line while you play that.
Okay.
And we should be able to hear both parts together. So let's just take it at a slower tempo.
Okay.
I'm going to start off with the piano part. You join in, and I'll let go. And then I'm going to come in with a bass line and see what we get. So I'll start off. Don't worry about the octaves.
Okay.
I'm going to play it exactly as written with both hands.
Sounds good.
1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4. So why don't you go ahead and try that, and then I'm going to try playing the bass and see if we can sync together.
Okay.
1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4. Great, beautiful. All right, so what's happening is your part is fitting on top of the bass line, and the bass line is completely syncopated, and your part is mostly syncopated, and so that's the challenge of Afro-Cuban piano in general. And what happens in this chart is that there's a point where the clave direction switches from 2-3 to 3-2, and that happens by the addition or the deletion of one bar in a phrase. So if you'll notice from letter A to letter B, at the end of the second system of letter A, there's an extra measure, and then at letter B, it says 3-2 clave, which means the clave direction is going to shift. So let's just look at letter B for a minute, and that pattern fits with the clave exactly in sync. So it's 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4. And then that extra bar at the end of letter B will then turn the clave around one more time. So try, if you would, letter B, and let's just see how far we can get. Great, beautiful. So now, the section after it has just chord changes, right, and chord slashes. And when you see that, the general interpretation is more loose, like you would in a jazz chart where you would just comp freely through the changes. Yeah. With the clave, you always have to keep in mind the accents. You want to think about what the piano could be doing to accentuate the idea of the clave without literally playing so much of the montuno pattern. Right. So I'm going to show you just a couple of ideas of what I would be playing at letter C. Okay. And the pattern I'm going to do is basically like a reduction in the regular montuno. The regular montuno would be something like. So I'm playing this very straight ahead phrase. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to reduce some of that. 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4. So I'm keeping the accents in there, but I'm not playing all of the arpeggios or all the sort of the detailed rhythms. Okay. You want to try a little bit of that comping? Sure. So 1, 2, yeah, right at letter C. Okay. 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4. Nice. That's great. And even less. You know, you could do a little bit less by holding the chords, for example. So I'm hinting at the montuno without actually playing it. Right. So let's try that again, and let me see if I can play the bass while you're doing that. Okay. And I'll count you in. Okay. Right at letter C. Okay. 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4. Yeah, that's nice. That's nice. Okay, so did you have any questions about like some of these patterns that are written on the page?
Yeah, so how would you implement that into comping?
Okay.
Rhythm exercises?
Yeah, well, the rhythm exercises are really a way of framing a lot of what these patterns typically do. So for example, if we fast forward and go into, let's say, the chord changes at letter J, which is the sensual montuno, the pattern that's played throughout the ending of the song. Right. This A minor 7 to A minor 6, B minor 7 flat 5 to E7. I'm going to show you just a variety of ways of approaching that so you can just experiment. Okay. I'm going to start with the basic pattern, and then little by little I'm going to move away from the basic pattern. 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4. Back to the montuno. So what I did was a whole series of variations. I added some harmony. I created rhythmical elements that were more like comping and less like very rigid montuno playing. But still, unlike jazz, you want there to be a little bit more consistency because people are dancing and you want to convey a little bit of that kind of groove throughout. So why don't you just try a little bit at letter J, and you can start with like a standard pattern, and then you can kind of go out. And just so you can see the chord progression I'm doing. So it's A minor 7, A minor 6, A minor 7 flat 5, and then the E7 is actually with a flat 9 on the top. So those are the standard voicings for this kind of thing. Yeah? Exactly. And then you're just toggling that pattern. So it's always with the bottom note. You know, you're leading with the leading tones. Great. Now, one other difference is try not to do any downbeats in the second measure. So you have, and I think we're close to ending, but if you'd like to try that one more time. Beautiful. Excellent. How are we doing on time, folks?
I think we're there.
We're there.
We're there? We survived.
We made it.
Nobody died. It's fabulous. Satya, thank you so much. It was fantastic. All right, everybody.
Okay, so in case you didn't realize it, we have two pianos going here. Our Director of Education, Rebeca Mauleon, was actually playing this piano here. So you were hearing this piano played live from San Francisco. In return, when Satya was playing, in response, San Francisco was hearing the exact performance that was taking place. And you'll notice that Satya was very fixed on the keyboards because she actually is seeing the fingering that Rebeca was demonstrating. And conversely, Rebeca could see the exact keyboard, the exact keystrokes that Satya was showing. So it's in very real sense, and even at some points they attempted to play together. So in a very real sense, you know, this is the direction of education for the arts. So to me, that's quite exciting, and I'm very happy to be a part of that. What she was playing, well, actually, I didn't speak at all about the facility itself, so let me just say a couple of words. San Francisco Jazz Center has been open for about 2 years now. We have about 700 seats and the capacity to shift our hall in various configurations to make it more intimate to groups of about 300 or so. As you know, jazz, jazz sells fewer tickets than most other forms of music. So we specifically designed a hall that would feel perfectly full for jazz audiences, and that's the result of it, SFJAZZ Center. She was playing on both sides, actually. We were playing the Disklavier, this instrument that you see here, the Yamaha Disklavier DC6XE3 Pro. And there's a lot under the hood for both of those machines, and you saw that displayed. As I said, it is the future of being able to expand this art where we can have exceptional teaching and students in areas, both rural and urban, that get to interact with each other. On the other end of that, we were working with what's called the UltraGrid, which is a low latency, high quality video conferencing component. And as Louis indicated, one of the biggest challenges that this whole team worked tirelessly through the night was making sure that there was a reasonable sync between what you saw on the screen and the actual keystrokes that were taken. And I would say we reduced that aspect from somewhere around at some point, gentlemen, what was it? A good half second to virtually imperceivable, and that's the direction that we're going, and that's the bandwidth that you provide us as artists and administrators to work with. So the better you do what you do, the more opportunity we have to do what we do. I'd like to thank a couple folks, even before I totally launch into this. The entire CENIC team, of course, because without their support, we wouldn't be here. I'd also like to recognize Stanford University, because Stanford stepped up and said, I see a role for institutions just like CENIC did, and that don't have EDU as at the end of their website, that with the possibility that there are strategic partnerships that can be merged between the private and corporate and education. And so I recognize Stanford for sponsoring us into the CENIC organization, and I thank you for that. Makia and Jim and Bill, that was the team from Yamaha, and this is a perfect example of a strategic partnership that's very powerful. Here we have this incredible instrument maker that said, we're interested in what you're doing. And they actually, 2 years ago, brought a Disklavier to our venue and said, check this out, work with it. So Makia said, just about a month ago, said, I'd like to visit you and see what you've done with the piano. Okay, so she came to the venue and started to get into the guts of it and found out, we hadn't even unraveled the power cord yet. And that's 2 years in. So she said, we've got to change this. So we started having this conversation about the possibility of how we might display and showcase this technology in places just like this, because they certainly have an interest in what we're doing in terms of bandwidth. Because, I like to call, and I don't know if UltraGrid would appreciate it, but I like to call UltraGrid Skype on steroids. Because it's really, if you saw the quality of the picture, that's not something that you get in most video conferencing platforms. So I'd like to thank those folks, and then of course UC Irvine, Key, and Satya. Thank you for your participation, and then back home, Brian, who's been very involved in our technical piece, and Rebecca, who just performed that masterclass. So this is really. Last night, when we were going through this process, it was a moment of true uncomfortability, and we started thinking about B and C and D, and I think back to when Sherilyn was saying, okay, it's a really great idea, but make sure you have a few things in your back pocket. And I thought, about 1 o'clock this morning, that would be a good time to start thinking about that. And so I was looking for a place to make a decision around that, and I was thinking, okay, we're speaking to all these technologists, we're speaking to higher ed, and it occurred to me, the reason why we're really here is about the students. And so when I processed that, the commitment was, okay, whatever we do, wherever we have to go, let's make sure that this is an exceptional encounter for Satya. And that kind of gave me freedom around whatever would happen, because it really didn't matter as long as this technology was involved and the student got some meaning out of it, then I could consider it a success. And so from that, a couple of things happened. One, this morning everything started to work because we had a plan B. And two, during that time of turmoil, I developed this concept called a VMD. And I created a definition for it. It's virtual marginalization of distance. It's the result of minimizing the impact of perceived distance within communication cycles by use of advanced networking technology and the establishment of BA. Okay? Anyone ever heard of BA? Okay. So I'll get into that in just a moment. What this all came out of for SFJAZZ was like a strategic operation, a strategic plan initiative that happened maybe 10 years or so ago, which was called Opening Doors to the World of Jazz. And so I played with this concept because we're about to go through another strategic process. And I did some mind mapping and, grabbed all the pieces that I thought might work well with a partnership between CENIC and SFJAZZ, and I found all of these interesting pieces. So I took them all and kind of wrapped them up. I distilled them to a concept called opening portals to the world of jazz. And there are basically 5 components to it. So the first one is this BA of CENIC, and I'll explain that one. The BA of CENIC and SFJAZZ, for those of you that are unfamiliar with the concept of BA, can be thought of as a shared space for emerging relationship. This space can be physical, can be virtual, it can be mental, or any combination of them. And what differentiates BA from ordinary human interaction is the concept of knowledge creation. BA provides a platform for advancing individual or collective knowledge. Now, I know that, CENIC talks about, there are like 3 words: faster, cheaper, better, maybe, let's say, in terms of the network. And from the artistic perspective, that just addresses the barrier of entry. Once you're there, what really opens up is the opportunity for relationship and community. And it's that linkage that I feel will propel the arts into a global collective about how to approach these things using this technology. So it's more than just a series of one-off experiments or exercises that you see, but more of a collective mind sync about how to approach this. And this is, this gentleman, Ikujuro Nonaka, is a distinguished professor from Berkeley, or at least was. He's retired now. And what I began to see was a lot of connecting nodes in terms of the things that were actually happening in California. So we could take scholars from California, we could take students from California, we could take organizations from California, and we could start developing a model based in California that we could use to duplicate first regionally, then globally, nationally, and then globally. And so that was kind of the thought behind the concept of how this would work. So then I'll just go back for one quick slide and take a look at this piece again. So there are 4 pieces of the arrow, and with the BA of CENIC in the middle. So there's the Directorate, exchanges from the stage, auditions and admissions, and exploration, innovation, and refinement. Those are the 4 pieces of opening portals to the world of jazz. And what they do, each of them takes advantage of some particular element of programming that SFJAZZ is already embedded in. So it's not necessarily creating new things, but it's taking advantage of what already exists and overlaying the opportunity of the CENIC network to create partnerships to forward what we're up to. So, what I found quite interesting, this was the opportunity of our partnerships as a result of the CENIC connection. They're all over the world. The Research Education Network is global. So the opportunity to communicate on a global level, you talk about expanding audience, well, I think that represents a pretty good market. So the first one, exchanges from the stage, we have a couple of programs. Discover Jazz, which has programming actually in one of our smaller theater. We invite folks in to learn all about jazz. The other is Jazz in the Middle, which deals with middle school students, so it's outreach. Those numbers have been, we'd like to see those numbers grow. I mean, they've been in the hundreds where they really should be in the thousands. It's this type of application that provides that opportunity. Another one is called Family Matinees, which are performances that we do on Saturday afternoons. And this whole project around the public libraries that CENIC is involved in, to me, shouted opportunity to embed programming in, and provide programming to communities that don't normally have access to us. And the technology that's required to do this, because we get the biggest bang for the opportunity with the smallest technological requirements. We've actually built a second machine that we can send out to locations that, once they're a part of the CENIC network, that they can use, basically plug and play with 48 hours notice, and work through. And the proof of concept for this was when we did a piece between SFJAZZ and the California Library Celebration event that brought on a new property. And then, I looked at this other opportunity. These are all of, not even all, this is a good showing of the jazz education opportunities in higher ed throughout the country. Once again, a very, very nice market share, which, I'm sorry. There we go. Which brings us to the second program that we're speaking about. It's called Auditions and Admissions. And it was actually, this program, Auditions and Admissions, is modeled after a program called Global Auditions, which was introduced by the New World Symphony, I think it's the Cleveland Orchestra, about seven world-class orchestras that were engaging students from around the world in terms of an audition process. So it saved people travel, it kind of limited the field before serious consideration. So we took a look at this and thought, well, we've got some very good programs. We're certainly encouraging of getting students in the pipeline to participate in higher education. So instead of the goal of placing musicians into professional jazz orchestras, of which I think there are 2 in the world, we looked at what's the opportunity of reaching students all across the first state of California that are truly interested in jazz, that would like some kind of in-way into jazz study programs across the country. So that's what this program is all about. We have a very strong Jazz High School All-Star program. Of course, that links to this possibility. And we also have a Jazz and Sessions program, which goes out to middle schools across the area of San Francisco to engage them in jazz, in the possibility of jazz moving forward. So CENIC provides that outreach, which allows us to help those students that express an interest in jazz, break down the barriers for reaching out to the schools that they're interested in, and that's what that program is about. So, we did, as a proof of concept observation, we were an observation site for a masterclass between the University of Pittsburgh and Berklee College of Music. And then, of course, this is a further example, a two-site masterclass between UC Irvine and SFJAZZ. And the next one, Exploration, Innovation, and Refinement. This is the leg of our program that recognizes this stuff is hard to do for cultural institutions because they don't have the backbone of very large IT or departments to support their entry into this genre. I mean, one of the challenges that we had with the library when we did the test last year was, although they had particular bandwidth, the instrumentation that they were using, the equipment they were using had governors at various points that would not allow full access to the full power of the network. And these things were discovered late. So one of the values of what we're doing, I actually have committed 20% of one of my team members just to document these exercises that we go through in hopes of helping incoming organizations understand how this stuff works. So, so part of the things that would fall under this for us were just getting the network up. You know, we did some exploration with Jack Tripp, Blue Jeans, Lola, and UltraGrid, and the building of that second machine that I mentioned. And I see my partner Rob over there. You know, Rob is with the Exploratorium in San Francisco, another cultural institution on this network, is looking at, you know, we're looking at doing collaborations which actually use, we'll have artists in 2 sites playing simultaneously. So those are some of those things. Now, here's an interesting segue. You know, one of the masters of this music, a gentleman by the name of Thelonious Monk, is a pianist. He had a son. He had a son. His name is T.S. Monk Jr., and he also heads one of the most prestigious institutions for jazz in the country. It's called the Monk Institute. He said, you know, but once pulled into the world of academia, minus its black creators, there was a general attempt to distill it down to essentially a series of Eurocentric musical formulas. Things like that were disastrous in terms of jazz education and led to a generation of miserably mediocre jazz musicians. Now, I'm not saying SFJAZZ supports that statement, but what I am saying is it's an interesting perspective in terms of the value of the cultural tie of the music to how we are embracing, how academia is embracing the pedagogy around this music. To that, the third or the final piece of our program is called the Directorate. Now, basically what the Directorate is a group of academicians. There are certain qualifications for it. One is tenure, because folks with tenure tend to be a little more expressive in how they feel about their things. And it's a little safer. And a lot of jazz musicians don't necessarily feel safe in academia. And they don't necessarily feel safe, you know, in a business context. You know, they have to be careful who they take on. They want to make sure they get tenure. So these kinds of things, that's being a tenured professor is a part of this Directorate. And what it's intended to do is help to emerge a conversation around jazz in terms of where jazz should go in the future. It's not a short-term conversation. It's not a short-term process. Supports a safe space for academic discourse. It advances academic publishing on alternative discourses, because there's some thought in the jazz world that there's not enough diversity of thought. And so it's an opportunity to do that. And it provides a platform for the iterative curricular development throughout the education continuum, because we need to impact, if jazz is to have a bigger world, it needs to impact the continuum from kindergarten all the way through the university. And an example was that is we did a University of Pittsburgh Mary Lou Williams Cyber Symposium where there were members of the community, the academic community that came together, both practitioners and scholars, to have a conversation about that. Now, you know, interesting. Most recently, a member of my board asked me, you know, how do we expand these audiences? And 10 years ago, there was an interesting study done examining the demographics of the jazz audiences, and it was actually at my former university. It was, employer, Jazz at Lincoln Center. And, you know, there were a set of demographics that were very telling. They were telling because SFJAZZ did a pretty much identical demographic study just the last year, and you look at these numbers in terms of, you know, average age, average income, average level of education, ethnicity. They were literally mirrors of each other. You could not tell which institution was which, and that's 10 years ago. So what that says to me is that the demographic of the jazz is not changed in a decade. So when that question comes up to me, you know, when my board asks me, how do we change this? I think there are several ways. I think two immediate are, we need to start the conversation earlier. And that's why I show this picture. We need to approach the kids. We've got to do something about embedding the curriculum of jazz at an earlier stage. And the other thing is, I think if we're looking to expand the demographic, we have to find ways to expand the conversation multidisciplinarily. So it can't be just about music. It might be, how music, and there are examples of it. There are books that have been written and that are coming out. The Academy is playing a role in it. Jazz leadership. Now that guy, I don't know, has anyone seen that book? This gentleman was the CEO of Herman Miller, but saw the correlations between jazz and how great organizations run. Same thing for jazz business. There's a lot of information out there. There's a lot being written right now that correlates the elements, the essential elements of jazz, whether they be improvisation, creativity, the ability to work in small groups, those kinds of things, and the value of those things to embed across disciplines to bring additional value to those that may not normally be interested in jazz. Another one is, Yes to the Mess. So it talks about, how chaos can be a really good thing, how confrontation, how conflict can be a good thing, how, a standard set of limited rules, agile, adaptive project management, all those kinds of concerns are very well brought out in a jazz context. So, if you do those things, what you end up, so those two little kids that I showed you in the slide, well, these are those kids today, right? The one is me over at SFJAZZ on the stage, and the other is my sister. She's a professional pianist, jazz pianist. Her name is Jerry Allen, and she has engaged the idea of the Research Education Network as a way to reach out and make a difference. So you really need to start this conversation. I was at a strategic planning meeting right before I came here, and the conversation around education and technology was, well, let's create a 5-year plan. And my impression is that's about 20 years too late. We need to do some longitudinal things that recognize the value of starting the conversation. And this isn't just for jazz. This is a model that can be used across disciplines. We need to embed a conversation 25 years from this point, what it means, what are the opportunities that are inherent there. So in that sense, I think that CENIC provides a gateway to that opportunity because the outreach is quite extreme. It's really what I like to call the BA bridge. It's about creating those relationships, maintaining those relationships over a period of time, and being involved in the whole knowledge creation process as a result. I think it's a new paradigm in how we can look at the possibility of education and accelerating certain aspects of disciplines that may, for some reason, be underrepresented. And I'm all for that. So the long and short of it is what's available here is a shift in the way we as consumers relate to this particular technology. It doesn't necessarily, it's not all about how fast it is. It's also about the connectivity that it provides, and not connectivity in terms of a port, but in terms of other people, in terms of the globe, in terms of other communities. It's an opportunity for folks that are in underserved markets, in overserved markets, to interlink and learn things about each other, learn things that they would not normally have an opportunity to do. And I applaud CENIC because that's a part of their mission. And I think when you start dealing with essentials, the essences of certain things, then you create the opportunity for strategic partnerships that you've never considered before. It's just you have to get a little higher than what your bottom line is and start thinking about the value of what you can bring back to a community. And when you start doing that, whether your community be small or global, You know, those threads of making a difference in people's lives can create incredible strategic partnerships, and we're very thankful for that. So thank you, CENIC. That's it. Do you have any questions?